Support Name Explain on Patreon for ad-free videos, exclusive podcasts and blog posts, and to help choose what names get explained. Click the link in the description. 2020 is officially behind us, and you know what? I think I went the entire year without saying the C word. No, not that one. And there's a reason for that. I often struggle with talking about topical events. I like to keep my content evergreen, despite how big the name news might be. What might be big today may be nothing tomorrow. However, sometimes I do creep into the world of topical videos. Though with 2020, I took a firm stance to not talk about what everyone else was talking about. It was creating such distress across the globe, and I wanted Name Explain to be a distraction and a form of entertainment for people to enjoy. A getaway from reality. All in all, I like to talk about things once they're in the history books. While we may still be in the midst of a pandemic in 2021, the year 2020 is well and truly in the history books, and I feel it will be that year in particular which is best known for being the year of COVID-19. Honestly, enough has already been said about COVID-19/coronavirus. You don't need me waxing lyrical about it. The virus has affected all of us humans in one way or another, though humans aren't the only ones affected by it. Language has been greatly affected by the pandemic too. COVID-19 has brought old and obscure words to the front and center, blended unexpected words together, has made us start associating words with completely different words, and has even created new slang. So with 2020 in our rearview mirror, and hopefully the pandemic soon enough too, let's take a look at how COVID-19 affected language. What's interesting is that despite how much of the language we're using now seems new, a lot of it is actually just words from the past we are refashioning. The general consensus is that only one truly new word has been created via the pandemic, that being the name of the virus itself, COVID-19. This name was given to the virus by the World Health Organization, and it's pretty simple to explain. It's a blending of coronavirus, disease, and the 19 at the end represents the year the virus emerged. While this might seem like a pretty clinical way to name something, a lot more thought went into the name than you may expect at first. The WHO explained the name, saying, "We had to find the name that did not refer to a geographic location, an animal, an individual or group of people, and which is also pronounceable and related to the disease." This makes all the sense in the world, especially as previous pandemic names have pointed towards a specific group of people or a country who aren't even believed to have started it in the first place. Since the word's inception in February 2020, variations of it have already started to form. Most popularly, the 19 part of the name is often dropped, with it being called just COVID. Another debate is whether the name should be capitalized or not. As it's something of an acronym, many people use all capitals for the name, while others capitalize just the C. Apparently, all capitals is more common in the USA, while other English-speaking nations stick with just the uppercase C. Before the name COVID-19 was given to the virus, however, everyone was just using the title of coronavirus. Coronavirus is the name for a larger group of viruses that COVID-19 is a part of. While it was a good name to use in those early days, it's understandable as to why it couldn't stick around. Calling COVID-19 just the coronavirus is like calling every cat just cat. While the name coronavirus shot into the mainstream in 2020, unlike the name COVID-19, it wasn't coined in that year. It actually dates all the way back to 1968, and the name comes from the appearance of coronaviruses under a microscope. Corona comes from Latin and means things like crown, wreath, and even disk of light that appears around a sun or a moon. This was applied to these viruses because they looked somewhat similar. As mentioned at first, coronavirus was the way more popular name for the disease. Even once it had been dubbed COVID-19, coronavirus still maintained popularity. Its spiked in usage was in March 2020, and as the year progressed, COVID-19 became the more popular of the names. However, both are still in common use, and at this moment of time, if you hear someone say coronavirus, it's most likely they're talking about COVID-19. Words that shortly followed COVID-19 in popularity were of course pandemic and quarantine. Both these words have interesting origins. Pandemic comes from Greek roots. The latter part means people while the former pan part means all, as a virus is declared a pandemic when it affects all people, and COVID-19 was declared a pandemic on the 11th of March 2020. Quarantines are something a lot of us have had to face in 2020. The word however has roots all the way back to the 14th century. It comes from the Italian quarantagiorni, meaning the space of 40 days, and stems from the plagues of the Middle Ages. Ships from plague-ridden countries were made to wait off the ports of Venice for 40 days to make sure they didn't bring their diseases to the city with them. It's surprisingly similar to what many people have had to do while traveling in recent times too. Something I found impressive during the pandemic is the clear language that has had to be used to get points across concisely and efficiently. At a time where various strict orders have been given to masses of people, you have to make sure those orders use language that's understandable and can't be manipulated. While it hasn't been a home run at every turn, there have been some great examples, at least here in England anyway. My two personal favourites are household and face covering. We've been told on and off not to mix with other households, and that word is super easy to understand as to what it means and what it doesn't mean. It clearly means people you live with, whether they be your parents and family, a partner, or even just housemates. I wouldn't have put it past them to use family instead, but that implies mixing with people who you don't live with. Household really is just the perfect word for this situation. Likewise with face covering too. It implies that it doesn't have to be a mask in the usual sense, but just anything that covers your face, as long as it's being covered. While these uses of language I see as a good thing, something not seen as such a good thing is the war language that has been attached to the pandemic, calling it a battle against COVID-19 and referring to certain jobs as being on the front line has become all too commonplace. Linguist Ines Olaza explains that a sustained use of that metaphor and abuse of it and the lack of alternate frames might generate anxiety and might distort things about the pandemic. Referring to COVID-19 as a natural disaster or the perfect storm are being frowned upon too, as these sorts of things are seen as being inevitable and doomed to happen regardless of human input, and the general consensus is that this pandemic could have been more controlled by us humans. Regardless, as the pandemic started to take shape across the globe, its language started to take shape too, and all of a sudden these terms and phrases from the history books and niche sources were being used by common everyday people. Take social distancing. At first it seems like an oxymoron of sorts. How can you be social over a distance? The point of socializing is that we come together, yet by March and April the word was all too commonplace. This word however goes back to the mid 20th century. It was pretty rarely used and simply meant to remove yourself from others in society. Now however it is seemingly forever linked with having to distance yourself from others to help prevent the spread of a disease. Likewise, self-isolation and its verb form of self-isolate have become remarkably common too, and this term is actually older than social distancing, as we have evidence of it being used in the 19th century. Likewise, lockdown was once upon a time used primarily in the world of just prisoners, yet by the end of 2020, most of us in the world have been locked down in some form or another. Words that aren't so much from the history books, but more from niche sources that have grown in popularity are R-number and furlough. R-number means reproduction number, and it relates to how quickly a virus spreads. Prior to 2020, this term was only really used by epidemiologists and other scientists, seemingly coming into being in the 1980s. Yet now most of us are aware of the R-number and regularly see how it's doing in our nation. Likewise, the term flattening the curve was only really used by scientists too. Now all of us know it. Furlough is a word of Dutch origins and initially was used with just the military, meaning permission to have a leave of absence. Over the years, it came to mean being allowed time off work with payment due to outside interference. And in 2020, millions upon millions of people will be having furlough thrown onto them. 2020 even dug up some acronyms from the history books for us to use too, most noticeably PPE and WFH. PPE means personal protective equipment and actually dates to the 70s. Likewise, WFH dates to the 90s and means work from home. A lot of the information for this video is coming from the Oxford English Dictionary, or OED for short. They tout themselves as the definitive record of the English language, and I'm not doubting that. They have made themselves extremely valuable during the pandemic. They are also known for their word of the year, in which they pick a single word to sum up the events of the year and changes in language. In example, 2019's was climate emergency, and 2013's was selfie. 2020, however, had no single word. Instead, Instead, OED put together a report called Words of an Unprecedented Year, which highlighted the use of language throughout 2020. It's a great read, and the charts and much of the information I've used in this video are from it, so go check it out. There'll be a link to the PDF download down below. Something I really love about this paper is how it highlights words we started to link with other words way more often in 2020. In example, the word most linked with the word essential in 2020 was worker. In 2019, it was oils. Essential isn't the only word, however, to have a different word start being linked with it. In 2019, the word remote was most linked with the words village, island, control, location, and monitoring. In 2020, remote was most linked with the words learning, working, workforce, instruction, and monitoring. It was only monitoring that stayed popular with remote in both years, and perhaps most interestingly was with the word Zoom, which in 2019 was just a verb. Now it is more commonly seen as a proper noun. In 2019, words most related with Zoom were 10 times, optical, 5 times, click, and lens. In 2020, the word most linked with Zoom were via, meetings, conferences, optical, and Skype. It really is a word that has changed meaning. And speaking of Zoom and its newfound popularity, it helped create some new slang too. Zoom bombing, the act of popping up in the background of someone's Zoom call. This term is of course a compound of Zoom and bombing, but it's also greatly inspired by the term photobombing, popularized years beforehand. And this is a great segue into the slang of COVID-19. So much slang and fun terms have been created in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been great to see people being so creative with language and having such fun with words in a time of such unrest. Humor can help people cope in hard times, and people can express humor through slang and words. I shan't list all the slang that has been created through the pandemic, but just to name a few examples, we have COVIDiot, meaning someone behaving irresponsibly during the pandemic, Morona, meaning the same thing, Blursday, meaning a day of the week that is indistinguishable from any other, Quarantini, referring to drinking alcohol in lockdown, and doom scrolling, meaning the action of compulsively scrolling through social media or news feeds which relate to bad news. Certain dialects have also created new terms too. Rona has become a popular nickname for COVID-19, especially with younger people it would seem. I also read boomer remover as a name for COVID-19 used by young people, but probably don't use that one. Sani has become the Australian slang term for hand sanitizer, and I even read that Cockney rhyming slang has created a term for coronavirus, that being Miley Cyrus. As the OED put it, 2020 really was an unprecedented year, so much so that perhaps the year should have a name unto itself. Sometimes eras of time in history get a title, and perhaps 2020 could be one of those times. I've seen it referred to as the lost year by multiple outlets, but who knows if that name will stick around. In fact, who knows what will become of any of this language we've all had to adopt over the year. Will it stay with us for the long term, like many of the things COVID-19 has brought into the world, or will these words and phrases disappear when the pandemic eventually does? And while I've only talked about the COVID-19 pandemic, that certainly wasn't the only thing to happen in 2020. Many events happened that spurred the creation of new words, or gave old words new meanings. So what other words entered the dictionary in 2020? Well, we'll talk about that a bit later on. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Hello all, and thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. You can find me on Twitter, I'm at NameExplainYT. On Instagram, I'm also NameExplainYT, and on Facebook, just search Name Explain. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.